Ladies and gentlemen, we've done it! After nearly 100 episodes, we've officially covered every single game currently available on the Nintendo Switch Online service. That's right, there are only 6 games left in need of getting the review crew treatment. And today we're going to cover all of them. I'm talking about old school treasures like baseball, tennis, Wario's Woods, Kung Fu Heroes, NES Open Tournament Golf, and of course River City Ransom. Sure, these games hit the online service years ago, but I still need to ask, are any of these games actually worth playing? To answer that question, I decided to flip through the pages of Computer and Video Games, GamePro, N-Force, and more classic magazines to see what the critics said back when these games first came out. So go and grab yourself a bottle of champagne and get yourself ready to celebrate this very special episode of Nintendo Switch Online Review Crew.
We are Nintendo Ultimate TV Game System. We challenge all players. You cannot beat us. Aim your zapper gun. You cannot beat us. Even with your robot partner. You cannot beat us. Score 1 million. You cannot beat us. Discover new worlds. You cannot beat us. We are Nintendo. We challenge all players. You cannot beat us.
Of all the early sports games on the Nintendo Switch Online service, baseball feels the most archaic. And there's a reason for that, as it was one of Nintendo's very first Famicom games, coming out in Japan in 1983. 2 years later, it showed up on the Nintendo Entertainment System, where it delivered a fun, no-frills experience despite not being the most realistic baseball simulator of its time. That said, 4 decades is a long time, and there's no doubt that baseball feels like one of the most outdated games on Nintendo's online service. I mean, look, you can still have fun, but just don't expect much from this first-generation NES game. As it turns out, baseball came out even later in Europe, which helps to explain the dismal scores that you saw from the critics. For example, Computer and Video Games gave the game a score of 47% when they reviewed it in 1989. Compared to the far more realistic simulators on the market at the time, they just felt that it was too old to recommend. Everything is very slow. Players waddle around as if they're walking through treacle, and when you throw the ball, it flies along at a very low velocity. Even pitching is slow. The graphics are also weak, with blocky and badly defined players and a very lurid pitch. The animation isn't very good either, and the whole game looks unconvincing. Ardent baseball fans will doubtless glean some enjoyment out of this, but I'd personally wait for a better version of the sport to be released before rushing out with my dosh. Nintendo Magazine System liked the game a little bit more, but not by much. Giving it a 60%, they argued that all the fun and excitement of baseball is here, but unfortunately, Nintendo's baseball has a number of faults in the gameplay department. The actual pace of the game is relatively slow and a tad unresponsive. The graphics are cack, too. Not recommended. Look, if you're curious to see how far baseball games have come over the last 40 years, then by all means, give this bare-bones NES game a try. That's sad. I doubt you're going to stick with this game for very long. We just got done talking about Mario Tennis on the Game Boy Color, so now it's time to check out the game that started it all. Tennis may look old and simplistic, but you know what? It actually holds up better than a lot of Nintendo's early sports titles. While there isn't as much depth to the gameplay as what we'd see in future releases, this early NES game is fast, it's fun, and most importantly, it's just a great co-op game. While there's no one-on-one multiplayer, Nintendo was nice enough to include a cool mode that allows 2 players to team up against the computer. Couple that with the cartoony graphics and the very first cameo appearance from Mario, and what you have is one of Nintendo's first great games. Computer and video games definitely liked the game, but I'm not sure they would have used the word great. Giving it a 7 out of 10, CVG noted that the graphics are solid and convey the sense of play well. You can serve, lob, and smash on forehand and backhand quite easily. One of the biggest problems for most sports sims is the lack of response in the joystick. This is a good, bog-standard version of tennis. Okay, is this game gonna keep you from playing Mario Tennis? No way. It's not even close. You know what? This version of tennis is still a lot of fun, and it holds up better than you might expect. When Nintendo's Golf first hit the scene back in 1984, it pretty much created the template for golf games going forward. NES Open Tournament Golf may not be as influential, but sports fans were not disappointed with this follow-up. This is easily one of the best looking golf games on the Nintendo Entertainment System, adding a level of depth and variety that was missing from the first game. It's also an interesting stepping stone, as you can see Nintendo toying with ideas that would be better fleshed out in games like Mario Tennis. Of course, the critics of the early 1990s had no idea where Nintendo would eventually take this franchise. Unsurprisingly, Nintendo Power was high on this game, giving NES Open Tournament Golf a score of 4.2 out of 5. That makes it their 11th best reviewed game of 1992, just narrowly missing the top 10. GamePro wasn't quite as impressed, giving the game a surprisingly low 3 out of 5. Well, not visually impressive and definitely not ear-pleasing. NES Open's variety of configuration and solid but not groundbreaking golf play make it one of the better Link's offerings to tee off on an 8-bit machine. Look, much like Mario Tennis, you're probably not going to put down Mario Golf in favor of this 8-bit classic. But I say NES Open Tournament Golf is still a lot of fun and definitely worth a play. This is a good addition on the Switch.
皆様お待ちかね、マリオオープンゴルフの開幕です。5コース90ホール、熱い戦いが期待できそうですよ。ズバリ見どころはやはり審査用のアップ画面でしょう。つまり大アップ画面で興奮も大アップというところです。なるほど。ファミコンソフトマリオオープンゴルフ、それではじっくりお楽しみください。
Not to be confused with the substantially better and more playable Kung Fu. Kung Fu Heroes is, what's the word I'm looking for? Garbage. It's an early beat-em-up based on an arcade footnote where the so-called masters sluggishly walk around the level, punching enough enemies to open up the door and go on to the next stage, where they do the exact same thing all over again. Oh, and did I mention that this just shamelessly rips off Super Mario Bros.? Released in the wake of Nintendo's seminal platformer, this brawler not only has you breaking blocks and throwing fireballs, but the developers actually lifted some of the sound effects straight out of Super Mario's first adventure. The result is a completely forgettable action game that somehow got released on the Nintendo Switch Online service. Now when it comes to the reviews, there's really just one. Nintendo Power gave the game a 2.8 out of 5, making it their 7th worst reviewed game of 1989. Sadly, this was the early days of Nintendo Power, back when the reviews were little more than glorified previews. So the most that we have to go by is their rudimentary power meter. They weren't especially keen on any aspect of the game, but found the graphics, sound, and challenge to be lacking, while ultimately giving the play control so-so marks. Honestly, this feels like Nintendo Power being kind to the game, but I don't know. Maybe that's just because this game aged like milk. Having already used Mario and Yoshi to sell their newest puzzle games, Nintendo couldn't wait to squeeze every last ounce of juice out of their newest anti-hero, Wario. Hot on the heels of a starring role in Super Mario Land 3, Wario Woods is one of Nintendo's most misleading games. Not only is it not a new platformer, but it's not even a Wario game. This is actually a puzzle game starring Toad that just so happens to be set in a wooded area that Wario's taken over. Of course, the most noteworthy thing about Wario's Woods is that it was the final officially licensed Nintendo Entertainment System game in North America. It was also the only NES game to receive an ESRB rating. Now, as you can imagine, magazines weren't exactly excited to review a Nintendo Entertainment System game in 1994. Most of the critics opted to cover the 16-bit version, leaving only Nintendo Power to review this 8-bit take. They gave it a 3.1 out of 5, liking the Tetris-like puzzle action, the fun 2-player mode, and the challenging puzzles, but complaining that it's too similar to Dr. Mario and the controls aren't as intuitive as Tetris 2. I know this game has its fans, but I'd personally recommend sticking to one of Toad's newer puzzle games. Really, the only one coming out of this game looking good is Birdo. These days, we know River City Ransom is an early entry in the long-running Kunio-kun franchise. However, when it first came out, River City Ransom was that beat-em-up game that let you buy hamburgers and smack around high school students. Although it looks like Double Dragon at first glance, this 1990 brawler was surprisingly deep and ahead of its time. You earned money, bought items, leveled up your character, and explored an open world that was just bursting with personality. Now, when it came to the reviews, the critics really liked River City Ransom. Nintendo Power gave it a 4 out of 5 in their 6th issue, which unfortunately was long before they started issuing critical reviews. N-Force went a little bit higher, giving the game an 81%. While they thoroughly enjoyed the brawling, they did have a few critiques. Unfortunately, 2 bad points marred what's otherwise an exceptional game. The collision detection's very poor, and the positioning of characters on screen is very tricky. There are some hilarious touches. Try picking up your opposition and hurling them about the screen for a laugh. Look, of all the games to come to the Nintendo Switch Online, this is the one that I wish had more reviews. The ideas were so forward-thinking that I would have loved to have seen what EGM or even GamePro thought. At least it's available for subscribers on Nintendo Switch Online to play over and over and over again. And really, that's all that's important.
Think that's pressure? Try Wario's Woods, the new action puzzle with falling bombs to stack, critters to whack, and Wario at your back. Only for Nintendo.